You are cruising at 35,000 feet, sipping a thimble of aggressively lukewarm ginger ale, when suddenly 1 billion volts of atmospheric electricity violently slams into the nose of your aircraft. The heat is momentarily 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun, the boom is loud enough to wake the guy snoring in 14B, and then, absolutely nothing happens. You just keep flying, eating your tiny pretzels, completely unharmed. It sounds like the inciting incident of a terrible made-for-TV disaster movie, but lightning striking commercial airplanes is incredibly common. It's not a freak accident. It's a scheduled Tuesday. On average, every single commercial airliner in the world is struck by lightning at least once or twice a year. If you fly frequently, there is a statistically significant chance that you have been sitting inside a giant metal tube while it was violently smitten by the heavens. You probably just thought the person in the window seat took a flash photo, or you were too busy watching Paul Blart, Mall Cop 2 on a tiny, terrible screen to notice. But considering a single bolt of lightning contains hundreds of millions of volts, which is enough energy to power a small town, or at least toast a really, really large piece of bread, it is somewhat miraculous that planes aren't constantly tumbling out of the sky like heavily uninsured lawn darts. Because electricity and highly flammable aviation fuel historically do not get along. In fact, they used to get along so poorly that it caused a massive problem. Back in 1963, Pan Am Flight 214 was in a holding pattern, waiting to land in Philadelphia. It was struck by a random lightning bolt, which unfortunately ignited aviation fuel vapors residing in a reserve tank. This caused a massive explosion that blew off a portion of the wing, leading to a catastrophic and fatal crash. It was a horrific tragedy, but it was also the exact moment the aviation industry collectively slapped its forehead and decided that maybe, just maybe, flying fuel tanks should be inherently lightning-proof. The main reason you don't turn into a charred briquette at cruising altitude today is because of a 19th-century English scientist named Michael Faraday. In 1836, Faraday realized that if you build an enclosed cage out of a conductive material, any electrical charge applied to the outside of that cage will simply travel along the exterior surface and never, ever reach the inside. This is known to science as a Faraday cage, which is convenient, because if it were named after me it would be called a giant metal electricity box, and nobody wants to fly in that. For decades, airplanes were built almost entirely out of aluminum. Aluminum is wonderfully, highly conductive. So, when a lightning bolt hits the nose of an aluminum Boeing 747, the electrical current just surfs along the outer skin of the fuselage, completely ignoring the squishy, luggage-carrying humans inside, before gracefully exiting out the tail or the wingtips. The electricity literally takes the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance is the metal tube, not you. But there is a modern problem. Airplanes today, like the Boeing 787 Dreamliner and the Airbus A350, are largely no longer giant aluminum tubes. They are made of advanced, carbon fiber reinforced polymers. Carbon fiber is incredible. It is unbelievably strong, it doesn't rust, and most importantly, it is very light, which saves airlines millions of dollars in jet fuel, which they then use to not give you free checked bags. But carbon fiber has one fatal flaw when it comes to thunderstorms: it is an absolutely terrible conductor of electricity. If 1 billion volts of lightning hits a completely carbon fiber plane, the electricity doesn't gracefully glide across the skin like an Olympic figure skater. It gets stuck, builds up intense localized heat, and punches a literal, physical hole right into the aircraft, which is generally considered suboptimal for aerodynamics. So, aerospace engineers had to invent a fix. During the manufacturing process of these modern composite planes, engineers take a microscopic mesh of highly conductive copper or aluminum foil and embed it directly into the outer layers of the carbon fiber skin. They essentially wrap the entire multimillion-dollar aircraft in a giant, highly engineered, invisible tinfoil hat. This mesh perfectly mimics the conductive properties of an old aluminum plane, ensuring the lightning slides right off without burning a hole in your window. By the way, while we are on the topic of surviving things that should probably end poorly, please subscribe to this almost dead YouTube channel. It takes exactly 3 seconds, it costs you $0, and it actively stops me from having to learn how to use Excel in a real office job. Okay, back to the planes. So, the electricity goes into the front of the plane, and it travels along the metal foil, but it has to go somewhere. It can't just stay on the plane forever, otherwise you'd step off at the gate, touch the jet bridge, and instantly vaporize the gate agent. If you look out the window on your next flight and stare at the back edge of the wing, you will see a bunch of little, spiky metal sticks pointing backward into the air. Those are called static wicks. They make the wing look like it forgot to shave, but they are actually brilliant pieces of engineering. Electricity is inherently lazy. It constantly seeks the easiest possible way to equalize itself. These static wicks are highly conductive and feature very sharp points. Physics dictates that electrical charge concentrates at sharp points, which makes it incredibly easy for the massive electrical current riding the skin of the plane to flow to the tips of these wicks and peacefully jump back off into the atmosphere. The lightning bolt enters the nose, rides the metal mesh, and then is politely escorted off the premises via the static wicks. Before a newly designed airplane is ever allowed to carry paying passengers, it actually has to prove this system works. Engineers literally drag a full-scale piece of the airplane into a laboratory and shoot it with artificial lightning. They pump millions of volts into the nose, the wings, and the tail over and over again, just to make absolutely sure the computer models weren't lying and that the static wicks actually do their job. But even with all that testing, we still have that one explosive elephant in the room, the jet fuel. Commercial airplanes store almost all of their fuel inside their wings. And the wings are exactly where the lightning is often traveling to find those static wicks. Lightning inherently creates heat and sparks. Sparks plus jet fuel equals a very short, very loud, and very final flight. To prevent a repeat of 1963, modern engineering goes to absurd, frankly paranoid lengths to protect the fuel. First, the metal skin around the fuel tanks is intentionally made physically thicker so a localized lightning strike simply can't melt a hole through it. Second, every single rivet, bolt, fastener, and structural joint inside the fuel tank is meticulously painted, sealed, and grounded to prevent even a microscopic spark from jumping across a gap. If there's nowhere for a spark to form, there's nothing to ignite the fuel. But engineers are paranoid, which is exactly what you want from people designing flying machines. They assume a spark might happen anyway. So, modern commercial planes are equipped with a system called OBIGS, which stands for Onboard Inert Gas Generation System. It slowly pumps nitrogen gas into the empty space inside the fuel tanks as the plane burns through its fuel during the flight. Nitrogen is an inert gas. It is not oxygen. And without a healthy supply of oxygen, fire physically cannot exist. So even if a spark somehow magically formed inside the fuel tank during a direct lightning strike, it would just sit there in the dark, surrounded by nitrogen, completely incapable of starting a fire. But here is the interesting twist. I've been phrasing this entire script as what happens when a plane gets struck by lightning. But that is actually a massive lie. Planes very rarely just get struck by lightning. In almost every single case, the airplane literally causes the lightning. You see, thunderclouds are essentially giant, floating, terrifying batteries. They have massive areas of positive electrical charge and massive areas of negative electrical charge. Normally, the air between these areas acts as a fantastic insulator, keeping those charges separated until the voltage difference gets so unfathomably high that it violently rips a path through the air in the form of a naturally occurring lightning bolt. But then, along comes a giant metal airplane cruising at 500 miles per hour. When a plane flies through a heavily charged thundercloud, it acts like a giant, highly conductive flying bridge. The plane's metal body drastically lowers the electrical resistance between the positive and negative parts of the cloud. The airplane doesn't accidentally intercept a lightning bolt that was already on its way down. It physically triggers the strike. The plane acts as a giant spark plug, initiating a violent electrical discharge that literally would not have happened if your specific airplane wasn't right there at that exact, precise moment. You aren't the unlucky victim of the weather, you are the catalyst. So, the next time you are flying through a nasty thunderstorm and you see a blinding flash of white light outside your tiny oval window, followed by a terrifying, rattling boom, you really don't need to panic. The multi-million-dollar invisible tinfoil hat is working flawlessly, the nitrogen is keeping the jet fuel incredibly bored, and the static wicks are throwing the electricity back out into the sky where it belongs. You are completely safe inside your highly engineered, flying Faraday cage. In fact, you shouldn't be scared at all. You should probably just feel a smug sense of accomplishment. Because you didn't just passively survive a lightning strike. You and your giant metal tube just forced the sky to bend to your will and created one.